Welcome to a journey back in time where history comes alive, not as dry lessons, but as vivid moments that transport us far from the rush of the present. Tonight, you find yourself standing at the edge of an empire vast, opulent, and ruled not just by sultans in flowing robes, but by voices that echoed behind screens of silk. The city is Constantinople, and the morning light creeps quietly across golden tiles and marble floors. Inside the famed Topkapi Palace, somewhere between silence and splendor, lies the imperial harem, a forbidden space whispered about in foreign courts and local markets alike. And here a slipper softly slides across a velvet carpet. Though the footsteps it carries belong to a woman who might soon shape the fate of nations, it's not all silk sheets and scented oils. You probably wouldn't survive here not long anyway. You'd trip over the etiquette by noon, offend the wrong eunuch by tea, and vanish mysteriously before supper. Welcome to the Sultanate of Women. Cozy, right? So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, post your location and local time in the comments. It's oddly soothing to see where we're all drifting off together. Wherever you are, I hope tonight brings you rest, comfort, and maybe a curious dream or two. Tuck yourself in, slow your breathing, and let the past keep you company tonight. And so we begin. Ha! You wake in a hush. The call to prayer has not yet broken the morning silence. You're already inside the walls of the Topkapi Palace, where the corridors are long and the rules even longer. Light sneaks through a screen of mother of pearl, turning the chamber's shadows gold. In this first soft hour, a quiet ballet of servants unfolds. Silk-smoothed, hair-braided scent burners, lit with cloves and amber. But you're not just here to watch pretty routines. You're here to sense the pulse beneath the embroidery. The harem is not a love nest. It is a cage gilded with politics, a maze of whispers, a palace within a palace. And at the center, women whose power does not roar but curls through the empire like incense. The most senior among them sleeps no more. She doesn't need to. The palace moves to her rhythm now. Her title, Valide Sultan, the Sultan's mother. The true seat of power if you ask the right eunuch. And you might. Because the first figure you meet isn't a veiled beauty with henna'd fingertips. No, it's the chief black eunuch, tall robed in black silk and moving with the precision of a sword unsheathed in velvet. He nods slightly. His job, everything. Everyone. Every movement permission or secret breath must pass his gate. And today he is already busy. You follow quietly. As you move down the corridor, each doorway hints at a different story. Some rooms hold lessons girls barely out of childhood, reciting Persian poetry with aching intensity. Others house musicians plucking at lutes, while tutors drone about dynastic succession. And then there's the embroidery room, so innocent, so harmless. Except it's where the women talk. It's where news arrives before the news bearers, where alliances are sewn as tightly as the seams in silk cushions. One fact is clear. Even now, harem women weren't just pretty. They were multilingual, well-read, and politically trained. The best among them could draft treaties and calculate military logistics with as much grace as they prepared sherbet. Yes, sherbet. The chilled, sweet drink, not the modern, fizzy powder. Although if you're expecting lemon lime, you're in for a pomegranate and rosewater surprise. Back in the corridor, you notice a pair of slippers neatly aligned outside a room. A sign someone important is within. Maybe it's the favorite consort. Maybe the Sultan's mother herself. Or maybe it's a trap. You never quite know in this place. And here's your first quirky tidbit in the Ottoman harem. Many women came not from noble backgrounds, but were enslaved, captured or bought from Eastern Europe or the Caucasus. Yet some would rise higher than any sultana born to power. It's social mobility Ottoman style. If you can stay alive long enough, the marble floor feels cold beneath your feet, grounding you in the present, even as the walls hum with centuries of memory. One of the most peculiar details historians debate is how much actual autonomy the Sultanate of Women truly had. Were they the secret engines behind the empire or simply advisors behind lace fans, flattering and maneuvering with what scraps they were given? Historians still argue whether the harem was a seat of female empowerment or just a well-decorated prison. Maybe, as with most things, it was both. And speaking of decoration, let's talk architecture. The harem is not just a wing, it's a self-contained palace within Topkapi. Think domes, archways, Iznik tile mosaics in blues and greens, so vivid they almost hum. Some chambers have tiny fountains just for the sound. Others have walls deliberately angled to carry whispers farther than they should. You pass through the Golden Road, an actual hallway named for the tradition of sultans, tossing gold coins across it during celebrations. Imagine being so rich your version of generosity is casually yeeting solid currency across floor tiles. Must be nice. Just ahead, two women glide by, their faces framed by silk veils and curiosity. You hear one giggle behind her hand. Was that about you, or are they plotting the fall of a rival? Or both? One more oddity before we wrap this walk among the strictest rules in the harem was the principle of invisibility. Harem women were not to be seen by unrelated men, yet their influence shaped policies, trade routes, and wars. Power here is hidden but vast. The louder the empire booms outside, the quieter its true architects move inside. And you're just beginning to understand the rhythm of this hidden world. You stay close to the walls now. The deeper you go, the more layered the silence becomes. Each corner seems to hold the breath of someone waiting, watching, calculating. Morning light now spills across colored tiles, casting reflections that look like shifting mosaics on the polished floors. The harem isn't waking up, it's already awake. It never really sleeps. It just lowers its voice. At the heart of it all is the Valid Sultan, the mother of the reigning sultan. And she is not someone you want to underestimate. You hear her before you see her, the clink of her prayer beads, the soft tap of her carved walking stick against the floor, the occasional hum of an old lullaby whose meaning no one remembers but everyone listens to anyway. This is the seat of real influence. And depending on the sultan's age or gullibility, her voice may be the only one that truly matters in imperial policy. Forget the military council. Forget the grand viziers. If the Valide wants a war, you might just find yourself marching. She enters the chamber like a storm in pearls. There's nothing flashy about her appearance, no glittering crown or embroidered announcement of power. She doesn't need one. Her eyes alone make space part. You realize instantly she has outlived many rivals and perhaps even a few of her own children. Mourning doesn't slow her, it sharpens her. You sit quietly at the edge of her audience room. This is where things happen. Messages arrive in folds of silk. Advisors enter with hesitant steps. Eunuchs kneel just enough to show deference without disrupting the room's symmetry. The valide lifts a finger, and somewhere across the empire, a caravan changes direction. One mainstream historical fact: this role of valide sultan, literally sultan's mother, emerged as the single most powerful position a woman could hold in the Ottoman court. By the 16th century, during what came to be known as the Sultanate of Women era, these mothers controlled court appointments, dictated foreign alliances, and served as de facto regents for underage or incompetent sultans. Yes, mom was in charge, and there were no bedtime extensions. Now here's your first quirky bit. When a sultan's mother died, it was said that her chambers were sealed for 40 days, her staff dismissed, and her scent burners extinguished an official palace mourning. But some whispered that her memory lingered longer than her title. Certain hallways, it was believed, still echoed with her footsteps, and not metaphorically. Ghosts with ambition, apparently. Even odder, there are surviving inventories of Valide wardrobes that included not just clothing but elaborate scents, ambergris rosewater, and something called musk of civet, which, if you didn't know, comes from a gland under a cat-like animal's tail. Because nothing says elegance like high-grade musky butt juice. Royalty has layers, but don't get too caught up in the perfumery. You glance around her chamber and every object speaks. The low cushioned divan beneath the lattice window. That's where letters are read. The brass incense holder shaped like a tulip. It's where secret messages are burned. And that small wooden box carved with crescent moons, not jewelry, that's where she keeps the names. Names of enemies, names of allies, sometimes the same name depending on the week. Here's something else: she doesn't just play politics. She builds. Many Valide sultans funded mosques, schools, soup kitchens, and bridges. Power, you see, needed permanence. You don't just rule. You leave stone behind. And yet, despite all her influence, scholars still puzzle over the true extent of her autonomy. Historians still argue whether the Valide Sultan's power was a rare form of female agency or just a tightly controlled illusion that existed only because it benefited the men around her. Was she the puppet master, or the puppet granted a gilded stage as long as her performance suited the court? Debates aside, one thing is certain: the Valide Sultan was not to be crossed. There's a famous, possibly apocryphal tale about a foreign ambassador who refused to bow in her presence. He was later found seated outside the palace with a broken ankle and no memory of how he got there. Let's call it Ottoman hospitality with a persuasive twist. Today, the Valide reviews a letter from the governor of Cairo. You recognize the seal wax, crushed ruby dust, and the faint whiff of something bitter. She reads silently, lips barely moving. Then she hands it to her scribe with a single instruction. No reply. You don't ask why? You just file it under "Don't be from Cairo this week." From the door, a young girl enters, no more than 12. She's a new concubine recently brought from the Black Sea region. You watch as she bows, eyes wide, lips pressed into silence. The Valide doesn't smile, but neither does she frown. She gestures for the girl to sit. A new recruit, a new piece on the board. New piece. Now here's a final strange detail to savor. Despite the image of isolation, many of these royal women maintained vast networks of correspondence with other courts, including Venice, Persia, and even the Mughal Empire. Some wrote in multiple languages, including Arabic, Persian, and Ottoman Turkish. Their letters often mixed diplomacy, poetry, and subtle threats. Picture your grandma writing aggressive haiku to get her way. That, but with geopolitical stakes. The morning thickens with the scent of cardamom tea. Outside, the first call to prayer rises. Inside, the Valide lifts her eyes to the window, as if measuring the day before it even starts. You realize she has already shaped it. She leans back. Another scroll arrives. Another decision is made. Somewhere in the empire, a ship will sail or sink because of this moment. And you're just a shadow in the room, lucky to witness how quiet control tastes like rosewater on the tongue and steel behind the teeth. The morning creeps forward, a slow procession of rustling silks and whispered orders. You step carefully through the corridors of the palace, following the winding geometry of its design, where every hall curves like a question, and every door opens into another layered mystery. You pass embroidered curtains that shimmer like brocade waterfalls, wooden lattice screens hiding more than they reveal, and footsteps so soft they barely exist. You're headed toward the harem training quarters because, believe it or not, this imperial labyrinth was also a finishing school. And not the kind with afternoon croquet and poetry recitals. This is the political version designed to craft perfect instruments of power out of girls barely past childhood. The halls buzz with movement now. Girls of every background, Circassian, Georgian, Albanian, sometimes even French, shuffle between language lessons, calligraphy practice, music instruction, and court etiquette drills. If you've ever imagined harem life as lounging around on silk cushions eating grapes, well, you're going to be disappointed. There's more memorizing diplomatic titles than massages happening here. One mainstream historical fact: the Ottoman harem wasn't just a place for the Sultan's concubines, it was a rigorous institution for grooming women in court politics, culture, and influence. Many concubines never saw the Sultan at all. Instead, they rose through ranks based on talent intelligence and the favor of powerful patrons. Becoming a sultan's favorite wasn't about looks alone, it was about survival, smarts, adaptability, and knowing precisely when to flatter and when to vanish. Now for some quirky gems. The higher-ranking women in the harem had their own seal. Yes, an actual official seal so they could sign documents and issue orders. Picture a 17-year-old girl sealing off grain shipments because the governor called her impolite at dinner. Even Otter I favored concubine Hurrem Sultan, aka Roxolana, sent love letters to Suleiman the Magnificent, written in rhyming couplets, and possibly cursed his enemies using enchanted rosewater. Romance and witchcraft. Very on-brand. You pause by the fountain at the center of the courtyard where the marble basin reflects a dozen anxious faces. A group of novices is reciting verses from the Quran, their voices overlapping like wind chimes caught in a soft breeze. A teacher walks between them with a feather switch, not cruel, just ceremonial, used more for rhythm than discipline. You notice how each girl wears a belt that signals her standing. Plain cord for newcomers, silver thread for intermediates, golden knots for favorites. No one speaks of promotion. It's earned in silence, sealed by glances and the occasional nod from the valide or one of her trusted advisors. But here's something stranger still. Historians still argue whether these women were passive pawns or active players. Some scholars claim they manipulated power from behind screens, nudging foreign policy and court dynamics through gossip and favor. Others insist they were merely symbols tools, used by more powerful men to enact broader agendas. The truth likely lies somewhere in the smoke-filled rooms between. You notice a girl limping during a dance lesson. Her foot's clearly injured, but she keeps pace jaw tight. Falling behind could mean reassignment or worse, obscurity. And obscurity in the harem is like being erased from a book that no longer exists. Back in the corner, a servant girl plays the oud fingers, plucking out a melody about unrequited love and vanished springtimes. The lyrics are older than the palace walls. One of the seniors, a confident girl with sharp eyes and a silk sash, hums along. You suspect she already has eyes on the Sultan, and maybe even the Valide's chair someday. You see another peculiar sight, a table stacked with small mirrors from Venice, polished so bright they reflect more than just faces. Girls use them to practice expressions, yes, but also to observe each other discreetly. Smile too often and you're deemed insincere. Not enough, cold and unreadable. Welcome to a school where your eyebrow arch is basically a resume. Suddenly a door opens with a creak that no one dares to acknowledge. A eunuch in ceremonial robes steps in, gliding across the marble like a living statue. His voice is gentle but firm as he announces the day's audience. One girl will be summoned to the Sultan's private chamber tonight. All eyes drop, not in fear, but in tightly controlled performance. You can't appear too eager or too afraid. The chosen girl is named Yasemin. She's 17, a poet with a reputation for perfect posture and poisonously clever jokes. You remember seeing her help another novice just yesterday, adjusting her veil with a mother's touch. Now she stands bows and walks into a future that could either gild her life or devour it. Behind her, silence returns like fog on still water. The others resume their tasks, not looking up, not daring to hope. This isn't a game. It's a ritual one that's been polished and practiced over generations. Then, a final oddity for the day tucked in one of the training rooms. You spot an older woman with ink-stained fingers, teaching a few advanced pupils how to write diplomatic code and ciphers. Yes, ciphers. The harem had its own language systems, secret ways to pass messages across the palace without interception. Think of it as early encrypted messaging, but scented with jasmine and hidden in embroidery. The girl practicing stumbles over a symbol, then erases it with a cloth soaked in milk. Milk. Apparently, it breaks down natural ink more cleanly than water. You wonder how many alliances were preserved or sabotaged with that simple trick. Outside, the afternoon sun leans lazily against the terrace walls. From somewhere in the distance, the peal of a small bell announces the arrival of afternoon fruit trays, cool figs, pomegranate seeds, honey-slicked dates. But no one rushes, because in this palace, appetite is second to ambition. Even sweetness waits its turn. You settle beside a jasmine-laced pillar, the hush of history curling around your shoulders like a shawl. In the harem, power doesn't roar. It hums. By now you've realized this place is less a home and more a machine, one made of whispers, windowless walls, and women who know how to read. A pause like it's poetry. You step deeper into the western wing of the harem where ambition simmers just beneath the perfume-sweetened air. Here lies the domain of the Haseki Sultan, the Sultan's favorite consort. She isn't just some pretty face with a knack for keeping conversation light. No, the Haseki is the queen of hearts in a deck stacked with knives. She has no crown, no throne, but her influence can bend borders, summon armies, and decide which courtier gets to live another week. A well-placed smile or a sudden absence from the Sultan's chambers can trigger tremors through the entire empire. It's a power that masquerades as affection and occasionally is. But more often it's strategy in silk. One mainstream historical fact. The title of Haseki Sultan was formalized in the 16th century, most notably held by Hurrem Sultan, the legendary wife of Suleiman the Magnificent. Her elevation shattered centuries of tradition. She bore the Sultan's sons, advised him on state matters, and even engaged in diplomatic correspondence. Her letters to foreign leaders often signed with poetic metaphors and subtle commands. It wasn't just pillow talk, it was policy. Now, here comes the weirdness. Hurrem may have started as a Ukrainian slave. Some say she was kidnapped by Crimean Tatars and sold into the Ottoman court. From chains to empire in a single lifetime makes your last promotion at work feel a bit less dramatic, doesn't it? And here's an even stranger nugget she once allegedly gifted the Sultan: a pair of slippers carved from jade and lined with ermine fur. Not exactly functional, but apparently symbolic of walking gently through winter's judgment. Either that or they were just fancy and cold. Historians still argue whether such extravagance was part of her strategic brilliance or just a side effect of being very, very bored. You slip into her quarters and are instantly overwhelmed. The light here is softer filtered through layers of translucent curtain. Her carpets are handwoven from Anatolia, her cushions embroidered with verses from Hafiz, and her writing desk, Well, yes, she has a writing desk with drawers full of correspondence sealed and color-coded with silk ribbons. A servant pours rosewater into a shallow basin, the ripples catching the flicker of hanging lanterns. You see the Haseki seated near the open lattice, brushing oil into her long hair with practiced grace. Every movement she makes is calculated even when she seems idle. She doesn't notice you, or she pretends not to. Either way, the message is clear: she's always in control. Today, she's reviewing letters from the Valide Sultan. Yes, even the most powerful concubine isn't above maternal scrutiny. One line in particular seemed to irk her. Her brow furrows, lips tighten. You wonder what barbed compliment was slipped into that page. Perhaps a reminder of how many Hasekis have fallen from favor for getting too clever. The message might as well be scented with warning. And then there's the boy. A young prince, maybe 5 years old, toddles into the room with a wooden camel in hand. He stumbles into her lap, giggles, and she holds him close without breaking eye contact with her scribe. This is the real secret of the Haseki's power. She is mother to the Sultan's child. And in the Ottoman system, that means she has stakes in the succession. One day, if her son ascends the throne, she'll become Valid Sultan, and the palace will remember every syllable, every silence, every eyebrow lift she performed during her years in waiting. This isn't just politics, it's chess with bloodlines. Now here's a strange fringe belief that once floated through the court. It was said that the Haseki kept a secret ledger hidden beneath the floorboards of her chamber, filled not with state secrets but with poetry. She composed herself each poem a riddle tied to a person she had outwitted, outloved, or outlasted. Like emotional Sudoku, but with higher stakes. Some historians dismiss this entirely. Others point to rumors of a book of petals found decades later in the rubble of a fire-damaged palace, pages of delicate verse inked in crushed hibiscus. Real or not, it makes you wonder what gets remembered when history blinks. Outside, the midday heat glows against the courtyard's marble edges. The Haseki rises, the boy now asleep in her arms. She nods once at her chief servant, who steps forward to carry the child to the nursery. As she walks, other women fall back, not with fear but with deference. She isn't just the Sultan's favorite. She's the moon around which this constellation of influence orbits. And yet, as she disappears behind an embroidered curtain, you hear her humming, not a lullaby, but a folk song from her birthplace, a place she likely hasn't seen since childhood. Power doesn't erase the past. It just gilds the parts you can use and buries the rest. Back in the hallway, a eunuch passes with a bowl of candied violets, gifts from a visiting dignitary. You grab one. It tastes like perfume and risk. The harem's tempo changes now. Afternoon lessons resume. Ambitions recalibrate. Somewhere a girl slips into a practice chamber to rehearse a dance so precise it's timed to the blink of an eye. Someone else weeps silently into a scarf because her letter home was returned unopened. Another writes a reply to the valide, carefully balancing truth submission and a single carefully chosen compliment. This is no place for simple people or simple stories. You exhale. The incense hangs heavy in the air. Sweet, spicy, suffocating, like the harem itself. Evening creeps in slow and sultry like a cat curling up along the edge of an ottoman. The harem softens into something quieter now, no less tense but more theatrical. You walk past rooms where shadows flicker over domed ceilings, the oil lamps breathing like sleepy fireflies. It's time for the salamlik, the ritualized evening salon where stories, music, and conversation serve as both entertainment and a minefield of hidden meanings. These are the hours when words become weapons and flattery a polished dagger. You, of course, take a seat in the corner, careful not to make eye contact for too long. That's a whole different kind of invitation. A harp begins to sing. A girl with fingers like liquid glass draws sound from the strings with the elegance of a crane mid-flight. The room listens, some enchanted, some pretending to be, and others doing the real work, watching who watches whom. Mainstream historical fact incoming Ottoman harems were as much social salons as they were centers of influence. While public life in the empire followed rigid gender divisions, these private salons became breeding grounds for political alliances, artistic trends, and even philosophical debate. The harem wasn't simply ornamental, it was a crucible. Now for some wonderfully weird details. According to court diaries, one Valid Sultan maintained a rotating guest list of storytellers, shadow puppeteers, and this is real trained parrots who had been taught to say flirtatious phrases in Persian. Imagine being outmaneuvered in court gossip by a cockatoo. And here's another gem. It was considered extremely fashionable during certain periods for the women to speak in riddles and coded proverbs during these gatherings. Direct speech was seen as too common. So instead of "you look tired," someone might say, "even the tulip droops when the cypress won't listen." Translation: get some rest or stop being dramatic. Tonight's theme appears to be regret and longing. Not because it was a sign, but because three separate songs mention the river that forgets, and at least two poems involve dying birds and unfinished letters. Someone's clearly been ghosted. You sip something, probably sherbet laced with violet. It tastes purple. Around you, fans flutter, earrings shimmer, and slippered feet tap in rhythm under embroidered skirts. The girls closest to the musicians seem at ease, but you notice their hands never stop moving, fixing a braid, smoothing a sleeve, gesturing in subtle code to someone across the cushions. Suddenly the mood shifts. A figure enters tall and severe in posture, wrapped in layered robes. It's not the Sultan, not tonight, but his sister, the Sultana. Unlike the women of the harem, she doesn't live here full time. She has her own palace, her own staff, her own ambitions. And yet she arrives often enough to remind everyone that family blood outranks romantic favor. Historians still argue whether these royal women were respected influencers or simply tolerated nuisances. Some records suggest they orchestrated major alliances, war strategies, and even the appointment of grand viziers. Others downplay their involvement as overstated by foreign visitors. As usual, the truth is a turban woven from both silk and myth. Tonight, the Sultana brings a poem. She reads it herself, voice low and precise. It's about a gazelle pursued by a hunter who never fires his arrow. Everyone claps, some too quickly. You glance sideways and catch a small moment, a woman biting her lip as the Sultana passes. Maybe jealousy, maybe fear. Maybe she recognizes herself in that poem. As the music resumes, two girls rise for a slow, synchronized dance. It's not the kind meant for seduction. This is something older, ceremonial, almost hypnotic. The patterns they trace in the air resemble calligraphy, the script of devotion. A memory of old Persia, perhaps. Or maybe it's just a metaphor for knowing when to bend and when to remain still. A eunuch brings sweetmeats and gently whispers the valid's approval of the evening's tone. That may sound minor, but here it's practically a standing ovation. You learn another oddity: sometimes these evenings end with games. Intellectual games, not bored ones. Riddle contests, memory duels, or the recitation of tongue-twisting Arabic phrases at increasing speed. Loser drinks vinegar. Winner earns a kiss on the forehead from the valide, which is like a hug from fate itself. One girl, bold-eyed and slightly sarcastic, wins tonight's contest by naming 20 Ottoman governors in under a minute. The room roars in admiration. She bows so deeply her braid touches the floor, and when she looks up she's glowing with something more potent than praise momentum. The evening winds down with lullaby-like melodies sung by a trio of older attendants. Their voices braid together low and warm like tea poured in the dark. You're nearly asleep yourself when the final line drifts over the room. The moon sees all but speaks only to the loyal. Cryptic, yes, but here that's just the local dialect. You rise as the women begin to drift away, some to their quarters, others to stargaze from the terrace. There's always a watcher, always a whisper. Someone takes note of every exit, every side glance, every silence. Even the birds perched outside seem trained to remember who left early. As you walk back through the perfumed halls, your steps echo lightly against the tile. A door opens just as you pass, and you catch a glimpse of a girl weeping quietly into a bowl of pomegranate seeds. She quickly composes herself. You don't speak. You just keep walking. In the harem, grief isn't hidden, it's choreographed. You pause at the end of the hall where an old attendant sweeps rose petals from the corridor, muttering about petty poetry and peacock girls. She's seen too many evenings like this. Tomorrow the palace will buzz again. The music will shift. The players will change seats. But tonight belongs to coded verses, violet sherbet, and invisible wars. The morning after a night of poetic espionage doesn't offer much rest. You stir awake before dawn to the sound of sandals padding across marble and whispered instructions delivered through curtains. The harem doesn't sleep in, not when there are alliances to maintain, wardrobes to coordinate, and eyebrows to thread with surgical precision. Today is audience day. Not a theatrical kind of audience, although that wouldn't be entirely inaccurate, but a formal morning when the harem women, especially the consorts and senior favorites, are summoned for indirect involvement in palace affairs. Not all will attend, just the ones whose presence speaks louder than most conversations. You dress slowly, careful not to wrinkle anything, though a helpful handmaid quickly redoes everything you've done. She even adjusts the tilt of your sash with the same concentration someone else might use disarming a trap. Because this is one. Now here's a mainstream historical fact to anchor you during the Sultanate of Women era. Roughly the 16th to 17th centuries, female figures such as Hurrem Sultan and Kosem Sultan not only influenced the Sultan's personal life, but shaped matters of state, advised on succession, and occasionally ran the empire outright through regencies. As you make your way to the long salon, you notice the hierarchy laid bare in fabric and footsteps. The favored consorts wear silks dyed in impossible colors, blues that suggest sapphires melted in a teacup reds that could start a war. The lesser-known women dress more modestly, but some manage to look more powerful in restraint, like chess queens hiding among pawns. You're handed a fan not because it's hot though it is, but because it gives your fingers something to do while pretending not to listen. The fan clicks open. Painted across it is a delicate illustration of two nightingales and a fig tree. You suspect it's a metaphor, but for what you can't decide. Quirky fact: some fans in the palace were scented with pressed flower oils carefully chosen to suggest certain moods or messages. A fan that smelled faintly of jasmine might mean, I am open to favor, while clove hinted at danger lies ahead. You give yours a sniff and catch hints of lemon and musk. Translation ambiguous at best. You take your place near the back. This isn't your moment, and you know better than to steal light from stars in orbit. Up front sits the Valide Sultan, resplendent in layered brocade, her expression unreadable beneath thin veils of gold-threaded silk. Her gaze alone could redirect political winds. She's not only the mother of the Sultan, she's the mother of momentum. Next to her, a visitor bows low, a foreign ambassador's wife, you guess, judging by her embroidered slippers and the look of polite terror in her eyes. She offers gifts: a mirror framed in ivory, a bolt of strange green velvet, and somewhat mysteriously a tortoiseshell box. You wonder if it's scented or cursed. The valide receives the gifts with calm grace. No outward reaction, but one eyebrow rises ever so slightly. That's the harem equivalent of a standing ovation. The ambassador's wife exhales. Historians still argue whether these diplomatic visits were ceremonial or secretly strategic. Some scholars claim women in the harem acted as intermediaries in espionage networks, passing coded messages via jewelry or embroidery. Others dismiss it as fanciful Orientalism. Either way, the fans are still clicking and the glances still whispering. Someone behind you murmurs a proverb. The bird with the quietest song builds the strongest nest. It sounds nice until you realize it's probably about someone present. You resist the urge to turn. The conversation shifts. Now they're discussing an upcoming ceremony, possibly the circumcision of a prince, or maybe the inauguration of a new mosque. No one says names. Names are dangerous here. Instead, everything is veiled in phrasing. The elder blossom prepares to bloom, one woman says. Let us hope the gardener remembers the root, says another. You suppress a laugh. They're basically roasting each other with metaphors. Elite poetry slam, Ottoman edition. Another quirky footnote: in some harems, women trained in music or astronomy were considered better marriage material. Knowing the stars was a subtle way of claiming you could predict someone's rise or their fall. And knowing music meant you could play both a melody and a man. A girl beside you shifts slightly and drops her handkerchief. It lands with the softness of a falling leaf. She doesn't pick it up, but you see a younger eunuch quickly collect it. As he hands it back, he slips her a sliver of parchment. It disappears into her sleeve. You pretend not to notice. That's a skill in here, too. The audience breaks with a small bow from the valida. Like dominoes, the rest follow suit, bowing in ripples until only whispers remain. The foreign visitor is let out with practiced efficiency. The moment she's gone, the mood lifts slightly. As you exit into the hallway, you pass a group of attendants preparing trays of dried apricots and sugared almonds. One mutters, "More sweets than secrets today." Another replies, "Not true. The real treats haven't been unwrapped yet." You pause near a window that opens into the courtyard. Below, the Sultan's youngest son runs in clumsy circles, wooden sword raised high, shouting about dragons. A nursemaid follows with weary patience, and high above a falcon circles lazily, watching, always watching. You return to your room and find your slippers have been turned facing outward. That's code. Someone visited while you were gone, and someone wants to speak with you. You sit. The fan folds shut. Tomorrow will bring its own theater. But for now, the audience is over. The curtain has fallen, and the night, as always, listens more than it sleeps. The candle flickers low, just a single thread of flame, resisting the heaviness of evening. You stare at it for a while, pretending you're not thinking about the slippers, but you are, because in the harem, nothing, absolutely nothing, is accidental. A discreet knock taps twice, then once. You pause. That's the signal. You shuffle quickly to the door and open it just a hair. A servant girl slips inside, barely older than you, with eyes like darting minnows and breath that smells faintly of cardamom. She doesn't speak, just hands you a folded scrap of paper and vanishes before your brain can register the scent of her presence. The note is simple. Ink hastily scrawled in slanting script. Roof garden, midnight, come alone. Of course, because nothing important ever happens under sunlight. Here's your mainstream historical anchor for the night within the vast palaces of the Ottoman Empire. Particularly Topkapi Palace, the harem, included not just residential chambers and baths, but secret gardens, winding halls, hidden staircases, and locked rooms, each potentially a chessboard or a trap. You wrap a scarf loosely around your hair, not enough to signal servitude, but enough to fade into the shadows. The hall outside your chamber is quiet save for the shuffle of slippers and the distant hum of a lute. You walk softly. The roof garden is near the third courtyard, a place where only favored women trusted eunuchs, and sometimes the Sultan himself would go to breathe free air without eyes watching from every direction. The staircase you take is a servant's path, narrow and worn with centuries of secrets. One step squeaks, you flinch, wait, then continue. At the top, the air changes. It smells of lemon trees and jasmine, and the walls echo differently, like they have grown used to silence. You step out, and there she is. Not a lover, not a rival. It's her, the elder concubine, everyone pretends not to fear. Her name shifts depending on who's whispering it. Some call her the silk snake, others just call her auntie, but in a way that makes your stomach twist. She sits on a stone bench barefoot, cooling her feet in a porcelain basin. Her eyes settle on you like twin lanterns made of smoke. You walk well, she says, sipping something from a gilded cup. Most girls your age trip over their ambition. You don't reply. She likes that. She pats the seat beside her and you sit just barely. She begins talking not about flowers or politics, but about power. The kind no one teaches. The kind woven into the layers of courtly etiquette like a blade hidden in velvet. You know the Sultan, she begins, as if you don't spend most of your day avoiding eye contact with anyone who does. He listens through mirrors, watches through his mother. But sometimes even mirrors lie. Here comes your fringe fact of the night. Rumor held that certain decorative mirrors within the Topkapi Palace were enchanted, polished with a thin coat of alchemic silver, infused with mercury, said to show people not as they appeared, but as they intended. Historians argue whether this was metaphor superstition or a very early form of state surveillance with hidden peepholes. She passes you a plum. It's cold. You hesitate and she smiles like a cat discovering a lazy bird. You're wondering if it's poisoned, she says. You lie and say you're not. She leans in closer, plucking a leaf from your scarf. Never eat what's offered too quickly. Even kindness here can be sharpened. You pocket the plum, she nods satisfied. Quirky bit of trivia for tonight's whisper-thirsty minds in the Ottoman harem: fruit was often used in symbolic messages. A pomegranate could suggest desire or fertility, an overripe fig disgrace. Plums were trickier sometimes, representing seduction, sometimes death. Like the perfect spy, she stands, brushes off her robe, and begins to walk away, bare feet, whispering over marble. Just before she disappears into shadow, she says, "The prince is ill. That will matter soon. Be where others aren't." And then she's gone. You sit in the jasmine-scented hush of the rooftop for a long time, legs stiffening, mind buzzing. The moon glints on the water in the distance, and you wonder how many other conversations like this have been etched into this rooftop, lost to the wind. Below, the palace breathes on without pause, servants stir. Braziers glow, a eunuch chuckles drunkenly in the kitchen courtyard, and a fountain somewhere laughs with water that doesn't care about politics. Historians still argue whether the influence of senior concubines and consorts was orchestrated through daily planning or occasional chaos. Were these meetings like this one choreographed performances, or spontaneous plays performed for an audience of none? Some records describe the women as deeply literate, skilled in philosophy, and trained in subtle politics. Others reduce them to ornamented pawns in a gilded cage. The truth, as usual, wears a veil. You rise and descend the stairs with a different kind of step now. Like you've inherited a secret you didn't ask for. In the corridor outside your room, someone's left a pair of embroidered slippers. Not yours, different size, deliberate. Another message. Inside, a fresh cup of water, wait still cold. Another signal. You drink half, then pour the rest out because even in trust there's caution. You don't sleep right away. Your mind rolls over the puzzle. The prince is ill. Which prince? What kind of illness? Is it real or manufactured? You sit in the dark, turning the cold plum in your hand. Eventually, the candle burns low again, and like the palace itself, you breathe quiet, waiting, and never truly still. The next morning dawns with a slap of sunlight against your eyelids and a knock that is far too cheerful for such a suspicious hour. You sit up slowly, tucking the plum under your pillow like it's some kind of charm or evidence. Either way, it's not staying in plain sight. The eunuch waiting at the door doesn't blink as you open it. He bows ever so slightly, then says, "You're summoned to the Valid Sultan," which is code for you're either very lucky or very doomed. You dress with the precision of someone who knows that each thread could carry meaning. Not too much silk, or you look vain. Not too plain, or you seem ungrateful. Eventually, you settle on a lavender robe with pearl trimming and a sash knotted with just enough looseness to whisper, "I'm obedient, but I have a spine." But you follow the eunuch through a labyrinth of tiled corridors and lattice-filtered courtyards past the fragrant steam of the harem baths, past girls rehearsing dances that will never be performed outside this palace, and past women who watch without seeming to, because no one stares in the harem, not unless they mean something by it. You reach her chambers, and suddenly everything smells like rosewater and control. Here's your historical grounding. The valid Sultan mother of the reigning sultan was often the most powerful woman in the Ottoman Empire. She oversaw the harem, brokered alliances, advised her son, and occasionally handled statecraft with more finesse than any vizier. While technically confined to the inner palace, her influence ran through every hallway like an unseen breeze that determined who would thrive and who would mysteriously vanish. She sits on a low couch posture, perfect age indeterminate. Her voice when it comes is warm, dangerously warm. "Child," she says, "how is your sleep?" You answer carefully. Because sleep in the harem is never just sleep. It means peace or anxiety or poisoned dreams. She gestures for you to sit. You do knees folded, eyes down, but not too far down. I hear she begins that you've been observant. This could be praise or a warning or both. Fringe tidbit time. According to obscure accounts, some women in the harem were selected not for beauty, but for their memory. They would be assigned to simply watch and remember. Not quite spies, not quite courtiers, more like human ledgers of gossip, loyalty, and intent. Historians still argue whether these memory girls were an official role or a poetic exaggeration of what it meant to survive in such an environment. I admire that the Valid continues, "Eyes that see quietly are rarer than clever tongues." She leans forward just slightly. "Tell me, what did you see in the garden last night?" Oh, so she knows. Of course she does. You answer with a vague honesty. You mention a conversation, you omit names, you offer nothing you haven't calculated 5 times over. She nods as if your caution is delicious. "Good," she says, "you'll need that skill." The prince is recovering, but he was not meant to. There it is. The heartbeat under the sentence. A murder attempt, veiled, failed, but real. She offers you a fig, and now you're truly terrified. You take it, hold it, don't bite. Then she says casually, "You'll be moving quarters." Not a question, not an offer. Closer to the imperial garden, she continues almost offhandedly. The sultan walks there more often now. And now you understand. You're being elevated, or positioned, or sacrificed. Because in the harem, all three are the same until time proves otherwise. Let's detour into another strange fact. There were secret architectural quirks in the palace. Some corridors were built with deliberate echo flaws so that whispers could be heard a room away. One fountain had a basin carved in such a way that 2 women, sitting across from each other, could speak without anyone standing nearby catching a word. Water as both mask and messenger. You nod, say something obedient, and she waves you off like a favorite cat who has performed well. Back in your old room, everything is different now. The familiar pillows look staged. The mirror you used for pinning your hair feels like it might have been watching back. You pack slowly, lingering over each possession like it might be a clue to your own future. A servant arrives, not one you know. She doesn't speak, but she smells of pine smoke and mint. Her movements are efficient. She helps you gather your things, then gestures for you to follow. You pass the same corridors, but they feel different now. Weighted. Your new quarters are higher, nearer to where the Sultan walks when the mood strikes. The walls are warmer, the windows taller. There's even a view one sliver of Bosphorus water caught between two rooftops like a stolen glimpse of freedom. You breathe. Then you notice it. On the silk pillow of the bed, placed as deliberately as a dagger in a king's back, is a single plum. Exactly like the one you hid beneath your old pillow. Except this one is warm, and you didn't bring it. You sit spine stiff. Historians still argue whether the placement of objects like fruit or combs or scarves in harem chambers was simply routine or deliberate communication. But if you've learned anything here, it's that nothing inside these walls is ever just what it is. The new servant Pine and Mint pours tea without asking. You sip, slowly. Outside, the call to prayer echoes over the rooftops, long and melodic, blurring the boundary between the sacred and the profane. The harem is quieter now. That means something is about to happen. You place the plum on your windowsill like an offering or a warning, and then you wait. Because everything worth knowing in the harem comes to those who are patient, quiet, and just clever enough to survive the story. You don't sleep that night. Not because the bed is uncomfortable, on the contrary, it's all down in silk and lavender-scented sheets, but because sleep feels like surrender. And in the palace, surrender is a prelude to forgetting who you are, or waking up with an unexpected accident tucked into your tea. You sit instead on the edge of the bed watching the plum on the windowsill as if it might whisper to you. Outside, the Bosphorus flickers under the moonlight like a secret no one wants to admit they know. In the early hours just before dawn, the call to prayer echoes again. The world seems to inhale, and you exhale. Still alive. You rise before the sun. You know that time is power, and waking before others lets you own the silence for a few golden minutes. You slip into your new daily rhythm, a blend of ritual surveillance and charm. You bathe, dress, and greet the morning eunuch who appears with your breakfast. A different one than yesterday. This one has a scar just below the eye, a small white crescent. You note it. Today is a gift day. You're expected to choose a gift for the Sultan. No, not a love token. This is a diplomatic offering, a quiet way to show that you understand your place and know how to play your role. Mainstream historical fact time. In the Ottoman court, gifts were a form of negotiation. Whether it was a poem, a rare trinket, or a small embroidered handkerchief, each item whispered intent. A silk pouch might mean affection. A carved wooden comb could imply loyalty or even shared ancestry. One woman once offered a tiny vial of Egyptian myrrh, which of course had nothing to do with fragrance and everything to do with allegory. You select a mirror, small, silver-framed, edged in mother of pearl. It's a subtle message. I reflect what you wish to see, which in palace speak is equal parts flattery and survival insurance. You wrap the mirror in soft cloth, tuck a violet inside for scent, and send it with a note, for the one who sees farther than the stars. You cringe a little at the flourish, but subtlety doesn't win hearts in the Topkapi Palace. Drama does. Your reward arrives within the hour. A summons. Not from the Sultan, but from his sister. Now that's a twist. Ottoman princesses didn't play the shrinking violets of Western courts. No fainting in parlors. These women owned estates, commanded armies by proxy, and ran schools. A few even married at strategic moments, though always to men far below their own rank, and only when it suited their family's web of power. You're ushered into a room which smells of jasmine and horsehair. Her hands are covered in henna patterns of thorns and vines. She's dressed not in delicate silks, but in heavy brocade with shoulder seams that seem to dare gravity to fight her. She looks at you like she's trying to solve a puzzle and maybe doesn't like the shape of the pieces. You were placed near the garden, she says without preamble. You've seen who walks there. You nod, neutral, careful, and yet you do not speak of it, which is not a compliment. It's an interrogation disguised as curiosity. I speak when I'm asked, you say. She raises one eyebrow. A dangerous philosophy. Silence can scream louder than words in this place. A fringe tidbit. Ottoman princesses often kept their own miniature courts. They had favorites, attendants, and in some cases secret messengers who delivered letters and gifts far beyond the palace walls. Some even corresponded with European royalty under pseudonyms, an early version of diplomatic burner accounts. She tosses a pomegranate toward you. You catch it. Another test. You break it open without waiting for permission. Its red seeds spill into your palm like tiny rubies. You eat one. It tastes sharp and honest. Good, she says. I can work with someone who doesn't flinch at blood. Wait, was that metaphorical? She hands you a folded parchment, sealed with wax, no emblem. Deliver this, she says, to the palace seamstress, no one else. And just like that, you're promoted from decorative background potential consort to courier in a political whisper campaign. You tuck the note into your sleeve and walk the path you've memorized only in glimpses. Past the baths, past the marble fountains, past the white cat that always seems to appear when things are about to turn interesting. The seamstress's room is half storage, half theater. Threads hang like cobwebs. Bolts of velvet stand like soldiers against one wall. She greets you without standing. I expected someone else, she says. But you'll do. You hand her the note. She breaks the seal with a fingernail sharper than protocol allows and reads it silently. Then she chuckles. They're not subtle, are they? You don't ask. She pulls out a garment bag and places it in your arms. Return this to her. It's heavier than you'd expect for fabric. Inside, something small shifts with a thunk. Later, when you hand it off, you hear the princess's reply, they'll understand the weight. Historians still argue whether the women of the imperial harem played an active role in statecraft or were simply pawns moved by men. The records are maddeningly vague. One scholar claimed the women wrote policy in secret. Another said their only influence was pillow talk. But really, what is pillow talk if not policy whispered at midnight? That night, your dinner is cold. Not metaphorically, actually cold. A sign that someone forgot you, or that someone wanted you to feel forgotten. So you don't eat it. You wrap the bread in cloth and hide the olives in your sleeve. Your servant returns to clear the tray. She notices the untouched food, says nothing. But the next morning you find warm bread waiting in the chamber before the sun rises. A tiny gesture and a quiet signal. You've passed another's invisible test. You lean on the window ledge and bite into the bread while watching the garden below. The Sultan walks alone, his robe trailing slightly behind him, his expression unreadable. He looks up, just for a moment, right at you. And then he walks on, not fast, not slow, but with the gait of someone who knows exactly how long every moment lasts in the empire where time is power. You exhale finally. The plum is gone. You never heard it roll off the sill, but it's gone, and that somehow means you're still in the game. You wake to the scent of cardamom and the sound of distant music flutes maybe, or reed pipes threading softly through the morning, like a memory not quite yours. You lie there for a moment, fingers tracing the embroidery on your pillow. Each stitch tells a story you'll never hear sewn by hands you'll never meet. The Topkapi Palace is quieter today, but not in the peaceful way. It's the hush of anticipation, of schemes brewing beneath layers of silk and civility. The eunuch assigned to you this week, a round-faced man with eyes like polished stones, enters with your new clothing. Not your choosing, not even his. Someone somewhere has decided you're wearing green today. Emerald silk with gold accents the color of new beginnings, or envy, depending on who's watching. Mainstream historical fact, the colors worn by women in the Ottoman harem weren't just decorative. Each hue had meanings some traditional others coded. Blue suggested wisdom or loyalty. Red could signal fertility, desire, or political heat. Green, however, belonged to prophets, and sometimes to the ambitious. You dress without asking questions. Questions in the palace are like stray cats. If you feed them once, they keep returning, and eventually they scratch. You're led not to the garden or the music room, but to a different wing altogether. Fewer flowers, more shadows? Today, you're visiting the Valid Sultan, the mother of the reigning sultan, the true power broker of the imperial household. If the harem is a chessboard, she's not the queen, she's the player. The corridor that leads to her chamber is lined with golden tiles, each shimmering with floral patterns. Not a single motif repeats. You count anyway. A nervous habit. The doors open silently. Her room smells of incense and secrets. She sits on a platform strewn with cushions draped in dark velvet. She doesn't look at you at first, just waves her fingers lazily, a gesture that can mean come closer, or you may already be disappointing me. You move forward. Her voice is smooth and low. You've been quiet. You nod. I find listening more valuable. She smiles, not kindly, more like someone recognizing a game piece she hadn't expected to see still on the board. You're clever, she says, but not clever enough to think you're safe. Another fringe tidbit, the Valid Sultan held enormous power not only in influencing her son, the Sultan, but in managing palace appointments, foreign policy suggestions, and even military decisions. She had her own seal, her own funds, and occasionally her own palace. Some were beloved matriarchs, others were terrifying puppet masters. Today's Valide unclear. But she doesn't blink much, and her coffee tray includes exactly 3 cups, one for her, one for you, and one that remains full but untouched. You drink yours slowly. It tastes of clove citrus and implied threats. She speaks in riddles for a while, which is a common pastime here. You nod, smile, make soft observations. You know the rules, say nothing, avert, imply everything. She mentions ships in the harbor, a wedding possibly being arranged, a merchant whose prices have become unreasonable. And then offhandedly, a young woman sent a mirror to my son last week. You've been noticed. Was it a gift, she asks, still not looking at you directly. It was an offering, you reply. She finally meets your gaze. And what does a mirror reflect when there's nothing left to see? You hesitate. Possibility, you say. She studies you for a moment, longer than is comfortable, then waves you away. No dismissal, no approval, just pause. You leave her room more slowly than you entered, aware that her guards now know the exact weight of your steps. You descend the stairwell and find waiting at the bottom the palace librarian. Yes, there is one. A small man with scrolls tucked under his arm and ink smudged on his fingers. He gestures to follow. You're taken through a narrow corridor lined with wooden panels and past guards who barely glance up. You arrive in a vaulted room where dust dances in sunbeams and silence hums like a lullaby. The library is where old secrets go to retire. The librarian opens a small chest and takes out a worn folio, no title, just a symbol stamped in wax. A tulip, its petals inverted. He hands it to you without a word. You turn its pages. They're filled with notes, diagrams, lineage charts, and oddly recipes. I thought you'd want to know what came before you, the librarian says. Fringe. Tidbit number 2. The women of the harem often kept journals, sometimes encoded, sometimes in the margins of prayer books or cookbooks. These texts were smuggled across generations. Some disappeared. A few resurfaced in European libraries decades or even centuries later, mistaken for anonymous poetry. This folio appears to be a record of influence. Who was favored when they fell? What gifts worked? What warnings went unheeded? On one page, there's a sketch of a bird cage. Below it, a single line to survive: sing only when the storm is loud. Another page features a recipe for a rose petal paste, and beneath it, a warning: too much jasmine and the scent masks poison. You copy that one. Historians still argue whether such documents were actual strategic guides or simply emotional coping tools. Some call them palace folklore. Others insist they were blueprints for soft power, less Machiavelli, more Machiavelli in a silk turban. That night, you read the folio by lamplight. Every word feels like a whisper from someone who once stood where you are now. Someone who played the game, maybe won, maybe vanished. A knock interrupts your reading. It's your servant. There is to be a feast, she says. You are expected. Expected, not invited. You dress in crimson this time. No one delivers it, you choose it. Deliberate, bold, dangerous. Because the thing about red is it's either a flag or a flame. You walk past the women who pretend not to notice, past the guards who do, into the hall where food gleams like treasure and wine flows like intentions unstated. You're seated near the musicians, not at the center table, not quite exiled either. A liminal position. Someone's watching what you'll do with it. You raise your glass. You smile. You know the next test is coming. You can smell it in the cinnamon air. But tonight, for one moment, you eat. And in the glass's reflection, you watch the room not for love, not for enemies, for opportunity. You're awoken before dawn by the scrape of sandals and the soft jingle of metal anklets or keys, maybe both. Outside your door, a hush is being maintained with professional effort. A quiet this careful always means something is being prepared or covered up. You swing your legs out from under the silk and wool feet, touching the cold floor. It smells of smoke and rosewater, a combination you're beginning to associate with intrigue. A young servant, barely 12, waits just outside your door. She doesn't speak, just bows motions with her hand and walks. You follow. You've learned by now the ones who say the least are often the most reliable. She leads you to a lesser-known wing of the palace. You didn't know this hallway existed. It's lined with cabinets and painted screens, and beyond it lies a room thick with steam. The palace bathhouse. But this morning it's not for leisure. It's a meeting ground. Inside, steam ghosts curl in the air, wrapping themselves around low voices. Women lounge on marble benches, some cloaked in towels, others bold enough to wear nothing but their jewelry and confidence. You recognize two concubines who've recently risen in the pecking order. One of them, a dancer from Circassia, is braiding the hair of the other, who used to serve coffee and now drinks it from gold. They glance your way. You pretend not to notice. It's a mutual performance. Mainstream historical fact. The Ottoman harem bathhouses weren't just places of hygiene or relaxation. They served as informal salons where gossip flowed faster than water, and alliances were often formed in whispers, not declarations. You settle into the water, its heat loosening the stiffness in your shoulders, though not in your thoughts. There's a conversation nearby. You catch phrases like Venetian silk and the Cyprus matter. More importantly, you catch a name, harem, a name that lingers in the steam like a perfume. Fringe tidbit number 1. Hurrem Sultan, also known as Roxolana, was the most famous of the Valide sultans. A former concubine of Ruthenian origin, she rose to become legal wife to Suleiman the Magnificent. Legend says she used political acumen, charm, and perhaps a hint of witchcraft to get there. Historians still argue whether her rise was due to sheer brilliance or her mastery of palace espionage. Maybe both. Maybe neither. Maybe the truth sank into the bathhouse floor centuries ago. You remain quiet, listening. Later, back in your chamber, you sit cross-legged on your cushion, combing your damp hair while your servant fans the room. A breeze flutters the sheer curtain, revealing a courier at your doorway. He's carrying a folded note sealed with wax. The seal is lavender colored, a color associated with mourning or negotiation. You break it open. It's a summons from the head of the palace treasury. You raise an eyebrow. You're not supposed to have anything to do with accounting, unless, of course, someone is trying to test how well you can count favors. The treasury wing is quieter than the others. It smells of ink and cedar wood, and the air carries that faint mustiness only rooms filled with paper tend to acquire. You're ushered in by a eunuch wearing a ring heavy with garnets. His nails are long and perfectly clean. You wonder if that's a power move displaying useless fingers in a place built on numbers and efficiency. Inside the chamber, the treasurer, an elderly man with a beard that looks older than he is, shows you a document. "You've been mentioned," he says simply. The document outlines a proposed gift exchange between the Sultan and a foreign emissary. There's a suggestion to include a particular scarf, embroidered with a tulip design remarkably similar to one you've been stitching recently. Coincidence? Unlikely. Fringe tidbit number 2. Many women in the harem contributed to diplomatic gift-giving. Their embroidery, perfumes, and letters were often sent to foreign courts passed off as tokens of goodwill. In some cases, they contained hidden meanings, coded flirtations or warnings depending on the silk. The treasurer watches you. You offer nothing but a smile. "If I can be of help," you murmur, "I'm always at the Empire's service." He doesn't nod. He doesn't need to. Your real answer was in how long it took you to respond. As you leave, you note 2 things. First, the guard stationed outside has changed. A younger man, eyes too sharp. Second, there's a woman in a corner alcove who coughs when you pass. Not once. Twice. On rhythm. A signal. You don't look back. Just walk slower. Let them think you're tired or clever. Both are equally threatening here. That night, as the moon drapes its silver over the domes of the palace, you attend another feast. This one is quieter, more intimate, only key figures. You're seated beside the Grand Vizier's niece, a girl with laughter too loud and bracelets too many. She talks incessantly. You sip your wine and let your eyes wander. Across the room, the Valid Sultan watches the dancers. Her expression is unreadable. A statue carved from shadow and silk. The Sultan himself isn't here tonight. That's the real headline. Because when he's not in the room, others begin rehearsing power. The niece leans toward you. "Do you think anyone ever escapes this place?" You tilt your head. Everyone escapes. The question is whether it's upward or downward. She laughs, but it's hollow. Historians still argue whether women in the harem wielded true power or merely played roles assigned to them. The truth, of course, likely sat somewhere in the steam between the hot stones and a spilled goblet between your mirror and the valide's silence. Back in your chamber, you light a single candle. In its flicker, you open the folio again. This time there's a page you missed. A drawing of a gate, labeled Door of Felicity. And beneath it, just 4 words. All power begins pretending. You blow out the candle. In the dark, the words remain lit in your mind. Tomorrow, you'll visit the gardens, and maybe leave a tulip behind. Just one, to see who picks it up. Morning drapes the palace in gold and hush, and you walk slowly through the garden, as if every step isn't deliberate. The tulip is already in your hand, plucked, fresh dew still trembling on the edges like it's nervous. Or maybe that's just you. You take the long way, weaving past fountains and archways and guards who pretend not to watch. The garden is quiet except for birds and the murmur of water, and that's the perfect kind of quiet for plants to grow in. There under the pomegranate tree, still bare but determined, you leave the tulip. Just rest it on a stone ledge. You don't look around. You don't linger. You just walk away like it was a casual choice, like you didn't spend all night wondering who would notice. You spend the rest of the morning pretending not to care. Mainstream historical fact. The imperial gardens of Topkapi Palace were more than a royal leisure space. They were a controlled theater of politics. Who met whom under which tree, which paths the Sultan wandered, which flowers were chosen for bouquets, all were observed by the unseen eyes of the palace system. Even flowers could be signals. You pass the valid sultan in the hall of petitions. She doesn't speak, but she sees you. You know it. Later, when you're eating candied figs in the corner of a warm sunlit alcove, your servant arrives. She holds something in both hands wrapped in fabric. You raise an eyebrow. A gift, she says simply. You unfold it, it's a tulip. The same tulip, pressed gently between two silk handkerchiefs, but it's been painted. Its petals now bear a faint trace of gold leaf, and someone has added tiny calligraphic letters along the edge. You tilt it. The phrase reveals itself. Even the wind waits. You swallow hard. This is not poetry. This is a message. And you've been invited to respond. Fringe. Tidbit number 1. Some women of the Ottoman harem were trained in covert calligraphy, an art form that required secrecy and subtlety. Messages were often passed through embroidery perfume formulas and even baked into sweets. Scholars still argue whether certain surviving artifacts, like a scarf bearing strange patterns, were decorative or encoded warnings. The wind does wait, you think, but not forever. You spend the evening preparing your reply. Not a letter. That would be too risky. You go for a different tactic. You paint a second tulip, this one blue with 3 dots in silver ink, just beneath the bloom's base. Only the right person will know what it means. You fold it carefully and instruct your servant to deliver it to the pavilion library, to the shelf labeled medical treatises. That's where someone will find it. A week passes. You busy yourself with music, with embroidery, with pretending to be bored. The palace is humming with tension, something shifting. It comes to a head at a banquet held in honor of a visiting scholar from Persia. The music is slow and rich, the food decadent, but everyone is watching everyone, especially the Valida Sultan. Tonight she wears deep blue, the color of the Bosphorus at twilight. Her earrings are shaped like teardrops, each containing a pearl the size of your thumbnail. You catch her eye. She gestures, not with her hand, with her fan. Open flick close. A signal. It takes every ounce of calm to stand bow and follow a guard down a corridor you've never walked. Fringe tidbit. Number 2. The Valide Sultan's private corridors were legendary for their complexity. Some said they were designed by a mystic architect who used both mathematics and astrology. Historians still argue whether a secret set of tunnels existed beneath the harem, allowing the valide to move unseen. Eventually, the corridor ends. You step through a carved door into a room of shadowed luxury. Cushions spill across the floor like lazy clouds. Lanterns flicker like they're hiding something. And there she is, the Valide Sultan, seated still, serene. But her eyes, they're working. You left a flower, she says. It's not a question. You bow. She waves her hand. You've been clever, but cleverness doesn't guarantee longevity. You nod. She smiles thin exact. There's a matter, she says. A man in the court. Too ambitious, too loud. He believes women only whisper. She pauses. You've proven otherwise. You realize this is not a scolding. It's a job interview. You will host a tea. A small one, tomorrow. He'll be there. Say nothing out of place. Watch what he drinks. Watch what he says. And afterward report. Just like that. You're officially a spy. You sleep that night with one eye open. The next day, the tea is a spectacle of subtle performance. Fine cups, lounging nobles. A faint tension in the air like a violin string pulled too tight. You do as instructed. Say little, watch everything. The man she warned you about talks too much. About trade, about taxes, about the Sultan's health. He praises his own judgment just a little too loudly. He doesn't notice you noticing. When it ends, you write one sentence on a slip of paper. He asks the price of the carpets twice. which in this palace means he's more interested in wealth than loyalty. That night you receive no reply, but the next morning a new rug appears in your chamber. Rich red, complex knots, a tulip in the corner. It's not just a decoration, it's your promotion. Historians still argue whether the women of the Sultan's court truly influenced state decisions, or whether their roles were exaggerated after the fact to add drama to dull records. You lean back against the cushioned toes, digging into the soft weave of your new rug. The truth. Drama was the point. Power loves a good performance, and you're becoming the star. You start the day by stirring honey into rose water just to have something to do with your hands. The scent is calming, the ritual even more so. Outside your chamber, the morning is loud with the rustle of decisions you're not supposed to be part of, but increasingly are. The rugs speak now. So do the pomegranates. So do the door hinges that creak when they shouldn't. You've learned to read the palace the way some people read palms. Your first visitor arrives just past sunrise, a eunuch with a wrapped package and downcast eyes. From Her Highness, he says, which is vague enough to cover 3 different women. Inside the package is a book, its spine cracked and soft with age. A volume of poetry. Rumi, of course. His lines float like perfume across the pages. But one stanza is underlined in saffron ink. Don't you know yet it is your light that lights the worlds? You close the book slowly. The message is clear: someone sees your usefulness. Mainstream historical fact. During the height of the Ottoman Empire, certain women in the harem, particularly those close to the Valid Sultan or the Sultan himself, were granted private libraries. Poetry, religious texts, and diplomatic dispatches passed through perfumed hands. Being literate was both an advantage and a liability. It meant you could read secrets, but also be a secret. Later that day, you're summoned to the Hall of Mirrors. It's not a grand space, but it feels theatrical. Like you're the reflection someone else is watching, not the original. There you find 2 others already seated, an older concubine with silver in her braid, and a younger one who keeps tugging her sleeve as if hiding a scar. They look at you like a test they've taken before. A servant pours bitter tea. No sugar, you sip anyway. There's a matter of succession. The older woman says just like that, like you're already part of the inner web. The valide wants to know who supports which prince, adds the younger one who still won't make full eye contact. You say nothing. You've learned that silence speaks fluently in these halls. But your mind is racing. The Ottoman system of succession wasn't peaceful. There were no guarantees, no clear inheritance. Often brothers fought brothers, and sometimes mothers chose sides behind closed latticework, behind veils, behind quiet cups of tea. The woman across from you coughs softly and slides a small note across the silver tray. It reads, Hazir watches the falcons more than the stars, a phrase that likely means he favors aggression over diplomacy. Fringe tidbit number 1. Some concubines were trained in falconry not as a leisure skill, but as a way to decode the mood of the Sultan. Watching how a man treated his falcons, gentle or cruel, strategic or rash, was said to reveal more than his conversations ever could. You nod. And you understand. The tea was just camouflage. This was a gathering of informants. And you were just recruited again, only this time, not by the Valide, but by the network that lives in the shadows of her power. Later that night, while practicing your embroidery, you hide a symbol 3 overlapping circles into the hem of your robe. It's a quiet way of marking your loyalty. But to whom exactly? That's the question you're not ready to answer yet. You dream that night of strings tight, fine silk threads pulling gently at your wrists. When you wake, someone has left jasmine in your room. Jasmine means watch your back. You start walking more carefully. You keep your ears sharper. And you begin keeping track of who eats what, of who doesn't attend the baths, of which servant now avoids your gaze, of which guard lingers too long outside your chamber. Historians still argue whether there was a formal harem intelligence network, or whether it was simply a natural evolution of proximity attention and women using what few tools they had to survive. You attend a poetry recital 2 days later. The verses are mediocre. The real performance is in the pauses between stanzas. You sit beside one of the wives, not the favorite, but close. She says softly, "He's changed his food taster." You murmur, "That usually means someone's told him to." She chuckles low, "It wasn't me." You don't ask who it was, because sometimes you don't want to know what you already suspect. Fringe tidbit number 2. During a brief period in the 16th century, it's believed the favorite consort of Sultan Selim II had used perfumes not just to charm, but to deliver coded messages. One perfume with citrus and mint meant safe to speak. Another, sandalwood and musk, meant not here, not now. Perfume was power, and sometimes poison. Back in your chamber, you find a candle burning on your writing desk. That alone is strange because you didn't light it. Inside the candle is a rolled scroll, barely visible through the wax. You melt it carefully. The message, even mirrors reflect lies. You don't know who sent it, but you know what it means. Someone's pretending to be someone else. And someone is trying to warn you. The next time you see the Valid Sultan, she holds your gaze for just a second longer than necessary, and then she turns away. No word. No instruction. Just that look. The weight of it stays with you. So, when another eunuch arrives, new face, new voice, you hesitate before accepting the gift he brings. A ring. Gold. Carved with tulips and a sapphire so dark it's almost black. Inside the band, the inscription reads, "Speak only when silence is too dangerous." You wear it. Of course you do. But you don't trust it. You don't trust anything right now. You sip your tea slower, you sleep lighter, and you start writing letters you'll never send, just to keep your thoughts somewhere safe. Historians still argue whether the famous ring of the whispering sapphire found in the treasury after a palace fire belonged to a consort, a spy, or a forger who snuck into the harem disguised as a bathhouse attendant. You think about that sometimes. Who you would be if you weren't being watched from every side. A poet, a weaver, a merchant's daughter. But no, you're here, you're this. And even though you're playing a game with no rule book, you're starting to win a little, or at least survive. And in this palace, that's enough for now. You wake before dawn now, not out of discipline, but because something in your body has tuned itself to the palace's rhythms. The whisper of slippers on marble, the rattle of trays being set for breakfast, the birds singing over the Bosphorus, it's all part of the quiet choreography that precedes politics. Your first thought is of that ring, the one with the sapphire so dark it eats light. You still don't know who sent it, but you keep wearing it. Out of caution, out of curiosity, maybe a little of both. By the time the sky turns pale pink, you're already dressed, your veil pinned neatly, your scent carefully chosen. Not too bold, not forgettable. You go with rosewater layered over cloves. It says I am soft, but I burn. That morning, you're summoned to a pavilion in the gardens, a rare thing since most meetings stay cloaked in the palace's shadows. This one smells like bait. The eunuch who escorts you won't meet your eyes. His silence is heavier than usual. You walk past rows of tulips that haven't bloomed yet. Their buds are clenched tight like secrets. You can relate. When you enter the pavilion, there are 3 people already inside. The Valid Sultan, the chief black eunuch, and the Grand Mufti. Oh, this is no tea party. Mainstream historical fact. The chief black eunuch who oversaw the imperial harem was one of the most powerful men in the empire. More than just a warden, he was often a mediator between the sultan and the women closest to him. The Grand Mufti, on the other hand, was the highest religious authority. His presence here makes things even heavier. You're invited to sit. There's no small talk. The valide nods toward you. Her face is unreadable, which is frankly terrifying. "We are considering a marriage," she says. "Not for you. For someone through you." You don't react, not yet. She continues, a young woman in your care. A cousin, perhaps. Someone whose loyalty we can shape. You realize this isn't about love, it's about leverage. A human chess piece. And you're the board. Fringe tidbit 1. Occasionally, the harem used marriage as a diplomatic tool, but not in the way people often think. Rather than sending royal women abroad, they sometimes married off distant relatives or attendants to key viziers or generals within the empire. It was like planting a tree in someone else's garden that you still got to prune. You're told you will raise this girl, prepare her mold. She must think she belongs to you, the Grand Mufti says so calmly it chills the room. And she must never know whose agenda she truly serves, the chief eunuch adds. You nod. Because of what else can you do? They dismiss you with a wave. Outside the pavilion, you breathe in the garden's sharp spring air and try to make peace with the newest lie you'll be living. Back in your rooms, a silk-wrapped parcel waits for you. It's a bolt of velvet, crimson. Expensive, meant for a wedding gown. No note. But you understand. Someone's already chosen the groom. That night, you're restless. You walk the upper terrace and look out over the sea. The stars above Istanbul always feel a little smug, like they've seen too much. You hum an old lullaby under your breath. Below in the courtyard, a servant drops a tray and startles a cat. The moment passes, but you file it away. Every noise is information now. Historians still argue whether some women in the harem served as informal spies, not just among the palace elite, but within the religious and military ranks. They weren't spies in the traditional cloak and dagger sense, more like shadows that knew where other shadows walked. Later, one of your attendants whispers that the girl is arriving tomorrow. You don't ask her name. You don't want to know yet. Instead, you reread a letter you wrote weeks ago and never sent. It's addressed to no one, but you sign it with your mother's name as if she might answer from some safer place. You sleep fitfully. The next morning, the girl arrives. She's younger than you expected, barely past childhood. Her eyes are bright with that awful mix of trust and hope. She curtsies awkwardly and calls you sister. You smile. You hate it. But you open your arms anyway. You give her a new name, Layli, after the tulip. It's pretty, safe, erasing. Fringe tidbit 2. The Ottomans were fond of flower names for women in the harem. It was said that no one could be hurt while called after a bloom. Of course, this wasn't remotely true, but the fiction helped. You begin teaching her slowly. How to walk gracefully, how to kneel without creasing her skirts, how to speak so that a compliment sounds like a question, and a question sounds like praise. She learns fast. Too fast. You worry she's smarter than you. And you're very smart. One evening she asks, "Why do I need to know which door squeaks on the west corridor?" You smile so you can hear who's lying. She frowns. "What?" You just sip your tea. You'll understand, you murmur, one day. Historians still argue whether young girls brought into the harem as political instruments ever truly became powerful, or whether they were simply decorative tools passed from one ambition to the next. There are records of some who rose, and many who simply vanished. You grow attached to her anyway. You hate that. But she starts humming your songs, mimicking your handwriting, braiding her hair like yours. She becomes your echo, and part of you loves being reflected, until the day you overhear her talking to the same eunuch who brought the ring. She's too quiet, too poised. You realize she's not just learning, she's reporting, and you taught her how. You excuse yourself, walk back to your chambers, and shut the door softly. Then you laugh, because of course, they sent a girl not to be trained, but to train you in return. You lie awake that night staring at the velvet bolt, and you finally know what you're going to do with it. But not yet. First you'll wait. Let her think she's winning. Let them think so too. And then you'll open your own door. The one that doesn't squeak. The one no one knows is there. Not yet. You decide to take a different path to the library today, not because you need a book, but because it's the one corridor where no one ever follows you. The walls are lined with calligraphy quotes from poets whose names have been forgotten, but whose verses still echo faintly through the stone. You trail your fingers along the carved patterns as you walk thinking. Lael has grown sharper. In the last 3 weeks, she's corrected your grammar, once folded your veil twice when you weren't looking, and quoted the Valid Sultan to your face as though it were just a charming coincidence. She's testing the leash she doesn't know you can see. You've let her believe she's invisible. That ends tonight. Mainstream historical fact. The harem wasn't only a place of seclusion, it was a refined education center for young women. Noble daughters or war captives could be trained in poetry, music, arithmetic, and palace etiquette, eventually rising to important roles if they proved useful or charismatic enough. Many later became consorts' wives or mothers to sultans. Your next move is a performance, a quiet breakfast in the rose courtyard where the guards can hear you but won't listen too closely. You pour Lael's tea, hands steady. You drop your gaze just long enough to make her believe she holds power. She asks about the Sultan's dreams and whether he talks in his sleep. You offer her a secret, a fake one. He murmurs his horse's name when he's afraid you say eyes twinkling, like a child calling for his dog. She hides a smile behind her cup. She'll pass it along. It'll leak upward. It always does. Let her try. That night you find a note tucked into your pillow. No signature, no wax seal. But the ink is fresh. Just 4 words? Velvet red Thursday sunset. Well then, time to use that bolt of crimson fabric. Fringe tidbit 1. Red velvet was reserved for those closest to the Sultan. Worn without permission, it could be considered not just a breach of etiquette, but a symbolic challenge. So naturally, it was the most sought-after cloth in the harem, sometimes traded secretly between favorites like contraband. You visit the tailor at dawn. Not your usual one, he's too talkative. This one is old, mostly blind, and famously loyal to no one but his craft. You hand over the velvet sketch, a design, and say one word. Dangerous. He raises a bushy eyebrow, nods, and says nothing. Perfect. Lael asks questions later. She's noticed the whispers, the sudden quiet when she walks into rooms, the veiled looks, the courtesies offered too quickly. Am I being watched? She asks, pretending to laugh. Oh, my dear, you say we all are. You touch her cheek with theatrical warmth, just enough to make the eunuch in the hallway sigh with relief. Let them think you still care. Later, you meet with a servant girl in the laundry. She's short, nearly invisible, but you know she listens more than she speaks. You pay her in almond sweets to whisper only this: the velvet is for morning. She doesn't ask whose. She doesn't need to. By Thursday sunset, the dress is ready. You wear it without a veil just for a moment, standing in front of your mirror as the light cuts in through the high windows. You look like a flame in human form. Fringe tidbit 2. According to legend, one of the most powerful harem women once wore nothing but red for an entire month. Red robes, red slippers, even red ink for her letters during a political crisis, as a subtle reminder of her blood ties to a rebellious vizier. Scholars still debate whether this was clever signaling or just fashionable spite. Historians still argue whether such sartorial symbolism was truly understood by the men who ruled, or whether the women dressed more for each other, an entire language of sleeves, hems, and color palettes that mapped courtly battles far better than swords. You only wear the gown for an hour, just long enough for Lael to see you in it. Her eyes widen. Why red? Because I'm done hiding, you say. Not quite smiling. She doesn't ask more. But you can see her thinking. And that's the point. That night you leave your chambers late. You slip past the guards down the back hallway that leads to the kitchens, then take the hidden passage to the garden. You know it from memory now. No lantern, just moonlight. You wait at the base of the cypress tree. After 10 minutes, he arrives. Not the Sultan, not the Grand Vizier, the tailor. You hand him another bolt of cloth. Midnight blue this time. He opens it, squints, and whistles low. Same design, he mutters. No, this one's quieter. He nods. No other words are exchanged. You return just as the first call to prayer sounds across the water. You sleep well for once. The next morning, Lael finds the red dress gone. She's searching your wardrobe like a hungry fox, pretending she's just admiring the embroidery. You say nothing. Let her wonder. Let her ask the wrong people the right questions. Let her whisper the right rumors to the wrong ears. This is a game you've played longer, and you're just now starting to have fun. It rains the next morning, a soft, persistent drizzle that mutes the palace into a watercolor of silks and shadows. The fountains sound deeper, and the pigeons nesting in the courtyard eaves fluff their feathers against the chill. Rain always makes secrets easier to carry, less echo, more blur. You take your breakfast indoors for once, seated near the brazier watching the embers pop lazily while steam curls from your tea. Across the marble floor, Lolly enters without knocking. Bold now. She's dressed in pale green, probably thinking it makes her look demure. You don't flinch when she speaks. I heard the red velvet was for the Valid Sultan. A beat. Then you smile. Oh, darling, you say, if she were dead, I'd be wearing diamonds. She doesn't know if it's a joke. Let her wonder. Mainstream historical fact. Mourning customs in the Ottoman court were elaborate and heavily symbolic. Colors mattered, but so did silence. Sometimes the absence of a particular fragrance or accessory told more than a week of wailing. Within the harem, women often competed to show grief with performative elegance, because grief could be political capital. You ask Lael to sit with you and read. She fidgets. You press a slim book into her hand. A poem from centuries ago. She reads the first stanza aloud. Her voice is careful, but her eyes keep flicking toward your face, measuring your reactions. She's not reading for the meaning. She's reading for your tells. You make sure there are none. A fringe tidbit. It was rumored that some harem women train themselves to control every micro-expression, to cry on command, blush at will, and hold their breath for up to 2 minutes. Not for seduction, for surveillance. Lael finally closes the book. I think I like it, she lies. Of course you do, you whisper. It's about a woman who escapes without anyone noticing. That unsettles her. Good. You send her away with a tray of candied violets. Not because you're being kind, but because sweets make people sloppy. As soon as she's gone, you summon the chief scribe. He's ancient, with eyebrows that droop like curtains and fingers stained with ink. You speak to him in riddles the way court women must. I need a message composed, you say. To no one, but everyone will read it. He blinks twice, then nods. You dictate. Some flowers bloom early, but the frost was never late. We regret the garden's silence. He doesn't ask what it means. But by nightfall, the note has found its way to 5 different people, including the Valid Sultan and the Grand Vizier. You know this because the coffee served to you the next morning contains precisely 2 more cardamom pods than usual. That's a signal. You're being watched more closely again. You drink it anyway. Historians still argue whether coded language was used formally in palace documents, or whether it simply evolved organically, a shared understanding between those who were never allowed to speak plainly. That afternoon, Lael makes her next move. She brings you a gift. A jeweled hairpin topaz and gold shaped like a crescent moon. From a friend, she says. You don't ask which. You take it, weigh it in your palm, and nod. Later, you boil it in a pot of mint and vinegar. Not because you think it's poisoned. Because you want the smell to reach the hallway. Let her wonder why. You also plant it cleaned and gleaming in the hair of one of your older attendants who rarely speaks and walks with a limp. That attendant will be seen in the kitchens. In the mosque, near the stables. You're making ghosts now. People who wear your signals so others chase the wrong shadows. Fringe tidbit 2. In the later years of the Ottoman harem, women developed intricate ways of proxying their presence. A perfume, a piece of jewelry, a distinctive slipper pattern, each became a signature. Sometimes two women might never speak, but they waged entire cold wars through scented towels and bathhouse patterns. That night, you leave another note beneath Layla's pillow. You know she'll find it. It's just one sentence, don't become what they made me. You leave no signature. The next day, she's paler. She avoids your gaze. She says nothing during meals. The silence stretches beautifully. You could almost feel bad for her. Almost. Because when you walk the long corridor toward the baths and past the Valid's guards, they don't stop you. In fact, one of them bows lower than usual. You file that away. Something has shifted. You reach the tiled steam chamber and pause just before entering. There's a slipper left neatly at the threshold. White silk, yours. But you didn't leave it. Historians still argue whether harem women ever assassinated each other directly, or whether they relied on misdirection and natural causes. The truth is likely somewhere in between. You slide the slipper aside with your foot and enter slowly. No one is there, just steam, and the faintest smell of jasmine. You undress, settle into the water, and let your breath slow. Let the slipper be a message. Let them think you're afraid, but you're not. Because you know what Lael doesn't yet. You were never the flower in the garden. You were the gardener. The next morning begins with a riddle delivered in honey, a tray of sugared chestnuts still warm, left outside your door with no note, no servant in sight, and not a single grain out of place. You examine the tray like it's a battlefield. Chestnuts. Someone remembers your favorite, or pretends to. You pick one up, sniff it, not poison, not spiced oddly, and eat it slowly. If someone's watching, let them see that you accept their invitation, that you're curious, not afraid, and definitely still standing. Mainstream historical fact. Offering food in the Ottoman court was more than kindness, it was political theater. The kinds of treats presented, the manner in which they were delivered, and even what wasn't included often spoke volumes. Among the women of the palace, food was both gift and gambit. Later that day, a eunuch whispers that the Valide Sultan has summoned you. Your pulse doesn't quicken. You nod once, thank him, and return to brushing your hair like this was all perfectly ordinary. In truth, the last time the Valid summoned anyone without cause, a girl named Mira disappeared for a week. And when she returned, she never laughed again. You dress carefully, not red, not white, not anything too bright. You settle on deep green, the color of patience and poison. You pin your hair high and walk like you have nowhere to be. The palace corridors stretch long this morning, echoing with distant voices and sandal steps. You feel the eyes of others tucked behind door frames and tapestry slits. You smile to yourself. The Valid's apartments are quiet as always, draped in velvet and silence. You bow low. She gestures lazily. Rise. She's older than you remembered. Not frail, just frayed. As if power is something that eats from the inside. Fringe tidbit 1. The Valid Sultan, mother of the reigning sultan, wielded immense influence in the Ottoman court. Sometimes called the real ruler of the empire, she could approve marriages, remove ministers, even dictate certain state matters, all from behind a lattice screen. Her words traveled farther than most swords. She pours the tea herself. A statement. You accept it. Sip it. Mint and rosewater. Nothing strange. I hear she says that Lael has become quite decorative. You nod slightly. She tries very hard. She smiles, not warmly. Pretty girls rarely last long in my court if they confuse ambition with loyalty. You offer nothing in return. Let her fill the silence. After a pause, she continues. The Sultan has spoken of you. This is new. You tilt your head curious. Mostly in his sleep, she adds like it's a joke. Fringe tidbit 2. The Ottomans believed dreams could be prophetic. Sultans sometimes relied on dream interpreters, and some women of the harem became experts in decoding sleep talk and dream imagery to sway court decisions. You sip your tea again. The cup clinks gently. The palace, she says at last, needs equilibrium, not noise. You smile, then perhaps I'll stop singing. Do that, she replies, or change the melody. The meeting ends without ceremony. On your way out, you pass Lael in the corridor. She's standing perfectly still, listening perhaps. You pause beside her. I hope you like chestnuts, you murmur. She doesn't look at you, but you know she heard. Historians still argue whether these silent confrontations within the harem walkbys, shared looks, veiled gestures, carried more consequence than formal edicts. The women of the court weren't trained to duel, but they wielded glances like daggers. That night you take no visitors. You sit at your window watching the Bosphorus shift under the moonlight. The ships glide by like secrets carried on silk sails. Below, the musicians practice for a festival no one has named yet. Rumors of a foreign envoy arriving, or perhaps a wedding, or perhaps both. Everything smells of change. And just before dawn, the old scribe returns. He brings you a list. Names. Some you know, some you don't. Next to each is a colored dot. Green, blue, black, red. You raise an eyebrow. He shrugs as if to say, I only write what I'm told. You thank him, and as he leaves, he mutters, Be careful. The dots shift more than the stars. You study the list all morning. And when Lael comes to visit, you've already burned it. She brings you fresh pomegranate juice, a peace offering, or a threat. You drink it anyway. Pomegranates were sacred to the Ottomans, a symbol of life, wealth, and complexity. Every seed a secret. You wipe your mouth and look her in the eye. Have you ever cracked one open with your bare hands? You ask. She blinks. No. It stains, you whisper. Forever. She says nothing, and neither do you, because there's no need to shout when the garden is already burning. You wake earlier than usual the next morning before the call to prayer threads through the air before the palace stirs with sandals and whispers. You sit upright in bed still as a statue, listening to the soft scratch of a breeze against the lattice. The palace feels hushed, too hushed. You wrap a shawl around your shoulders, pad barefoot to the door, and press your ear to the wood. Nothing. Not even the usual low clinking of breakfast trays being delivered. Then a single sound, a scream, far off, quickly muffled. You exhale slowly. Today's the day something changes. Mainstream historical fact. In the later Ottoman court, sudden removals or disappearances of women from the harem were not uncommon. A concubine might be favored one week and by the next, she was transferred, reassigned, or erased entirely from memory. Power pivoted on whims, alliances, and silences. You move carefully, dressing with precision, nothing too rich, nothing too plain. Something that says, I am not the one to be eliminated today. When you step into the hallway, the usual guard at your door is gone. In his place, a eunuch you don't recognize waits, eyes lowered. Come, he says and turns. You follow. No questions. The air feels heavier than usual, like rain is waiting to fall indoors. He leads you not toward the Sultan's chambers, not toward the gardens or the library, but through a narrow door you've never noticed before. The wall seems to sigh as it opens. A secret hallway. Fringe Tidbit 1. The Topkapi Palace is filled with hidden passageways used by spies, eunuchs, and even the Valide Sultan to monitor the court discreetly. Some corridors led directly between the Sultan's chamber and specific concubines' rooms routes that changed the fate of empires in the span of a breath. The walls here are cool, made of stone, not the usual carved wood or tiled mosaics. You step carefully, no echo. Someone lined these floors with felt. At the end of the hall, a small door barely high enough to stand upright. The eunuch knocks twice softly. The door opens. Inside a room dimly lit by candles, and sitting in the corner is her. Esma. You haven't seen her in weeks. She was favored once, perhaps too quickly, then vanished. She looks thinner, older, but her eyes still hold that spark. You came, she says, her voice raw but steady. I was summoned. She laughs soft and bitter. Of course, still playing the game. You step closer. She gestures to the floor. You sit beside her. I'm not a prisoner, she says. Not exactly. But you can't leave. She nods. You both stare into the candle flame. They call it the silent room, she murmurs. No one talks about it. No one wants to. Fringe tidbit 2. It's said that certain rooms in the Ottoman palace were reserved not for punishment, but for silencing. Women or servants who knew too much were housed comfortably but never allowed to return to court life. These rooms had no official record. I asked the wrong question, Esma continues. About a child that vanished. About who his mother might have been. She doesn't elaborate. You don't ask. Why summon me here, you ask instead? Because you still have a time, she says. And you're being watched, but not by who you think. She hands you a tiny parchment. You open it. One name, not yours, not Lily's. Another woman, an older one. You fold the paper carefully like it might disintegrate. Esma leans in. Whatever happens next, don't drink the jasmine tea. Historians still argue whether coded warnings were passed like this, hidden in pleasantries delivered in sense gestures or gifts. But within the palace, few trusted words alone. You stand. She doesn't rise with you. I hope she says you never see this room again. You nod. Not because you agree, but because you're suddenly not sure if you're leaving at all. But the eunuch is waiting. He leads you back the way you came, quiet, efficient, unbothered. A man used to ghosts. By the time you return to your room, breakfast has arrived. And of course, a pot of jasmine tea. You smile. Not today. You let it go cold. The rest of the day passes with suspicious normalcy. Lael pretends not to be avoiding you. The musicians rehearse again. The Sultan doesn't appear. You write a single sentence on a scrap of silk and fold it into a hollowed-out ring. At dusk, you slip it to a servant boy under the pretense of adjusting your slipper. His fingers close around it without looking. Later in the baths, a different servant whispers that the message was received. You don't ask who, only that it got there. And when you return to your room, there's no more jasmine, only rosewater, and an unfamiliar comb made of ivory resting beside your pillow. A message of its own. That night, sleep doesn't come easily. You lie beneath the soft canopy of silk, watching the flicker of the oil lamp cast slow-moving shadows that stretch and contract like curious ghosts. Every creak in the hallway sounds like a footstep. Every gust of wind could be a whisper not meant for your ears. The comb remains untouched on your vanity. Its presence lingers like a smirk. In the harem, nothing is ever just a gift. Mainstream historical fact. Gifting was a complex political tool in the Ottoman harem. A simple trinket could signal favor, a summons, or an unspoken threat. Even perfumes and fabric colors carried coded meanings understood only by the women of the court. The next morning, before you can sip your pomegranate juice, another eunuch, not the same as yesterday, appears. He holds out a scroll. No words, just the royal seal. You break it with shaking fingers. A single sentence: attend me at the fountain court, noon. Signed not by the Sultan, but by the Valida Sultan herself. Fringe tidbit 1. The fountain court in Topkapi was a semi-private courtyard used for quiet discussions, rarely by the Sultan himself. If you were summoned there by the Valid, you were either about to be lifted high or made to vanish politely. At noon, you dress in cool blue meant to evoke calm humility and quiet respect. Not that the Valide is fooled by colors. She's seen 50 girls just like you draped in every shade of submission. You walk alone through arched halls, sandals whispering across marble. The closer you get to the court, the more the palace empties out as if the walls themselves know not to eavesdrop. You enter the courtyard, and she's already there, dressed in deep burgundy, seated on a carved bench that probably remembers the first sultan's footsteps. A small porcelain cup rests in her gloved hand. She doesn't look at you. You bow. Sit, she says. You obey. A moment of silence. The fountain burbles beside you, an absurd little gurgle in an otherwise ominous scene. I remember when you arrived, she says without preamble. You looked at everything like you could swallow it whole. You don't answer, there's no safe response. I've watched you, she continues. You're not the prettiest, not the cleverest, but you see things. You consider the ivory comb. I see what I'm allowed to see, you reply softly. She finally turns to you. Wrong answer. There's a flicker in her eye. Not cruelty. Something older. Tiredness, maybe. Or regret she's worn for so long it feels like jewelry. I'm giving you a choice, she says. You can keep playing this game. Pretend to sip tea, leave notes, and choose past favors with a glance. Or she trails off. Fringe tidbit 2. It is rumored that the Valid Sultan maintained a shadow network within the harem, separate from the Sultan's informants, the janissaries, or the court viziers. Her spies were women old and young who passed secrets through embroidery songs or stories told to children at night. Or she says again, you can serve me directly. The air thickens. You wouldn't live as a concubine, she continues. You wouldn't return to your old room. You wouldn't be seen in court again, not officially. Then what would I be, you ask? She smiles faintly. A shadow, but my shadow. Historians still argue whether the Valid Sultan truly maintained such hidden power networks, or if the entire concept of her silent army is a romantic exaggeration of a role already steeped in mystery. But if she did, it's unlikely any records would have survived the harem fires. You hesitate. I'd disappear, in some ways. And in others, you'd see everything. You think of Esma in her silent room. You think of Lael's hollow smile. Of the tea left untouched. Of the note you sent never knowing where it went. You think of power. Real power. Not the kind that flutters in a silk dress and hopes for a glance, but the kind that sees the strings and pulls them. You lift your chin. I accept. The Valide nods. Then so softly you barely catch it, she says, good. I needed someone with quiet hands. From her sleeve, she pulls a thin silk-wrapped bundle. You take it. Inside an embroidered scarf, black thread on cream linen. The pattern looks random until you tilt it. A map, not of rooms, of people. Every knot is a name, every curl a route. It's beautiful and dangerous. I'll summon you, she says. Then she rises and leaves you at the fountain. You watch the ripples shift. By dusk, your room is no longer yours. Your slippers are missing. Your bedding replaced. Only the ivory comb remains no longer a warning. Now a key. You hide the scarf in your sash. Tonight you sleep elsewhere, but not as a pawn. Not anymore. You wake in the hush before dawn. There's no chime of bells this time, no knock on the door, no summons laced in perfume or petals. Just the gentle tick of your own pulse and the understanding that the rules have changed. You are no longer in the dormitories. The room is smaller, tucked into the quieter folds of the palace, a place where sound drips rather than rings and light arrives in slivers, not floods. One small window too high to reach, a simple cot. No embroidered bedding. The only luxury is discretion. Fringe tidbit 1. Hidden quarters like these existed in most major Ottoman palaces, not just for servants or favored concubines, but for operatives, informants, or members of the valide's inner circle. Their locations were often erased from maps, their occupancy unrecorded. You move like you've always lived here. Breakfast is brought silently. A bowl of yogurt, 2 olives, a wedge of honeycomb. No tea, no tray notes, no gestures exchanged. Just a glance from the servant who lingers 1 second longer than necessary. You nod. You've seen that face before. In the embroidery. By mid-morning, you're already working. Not in the usual way, not sewing, not singing, not reading poetry aloud to entertain some minister's cousin. You're cataloging names. Not aloud, not on paper, in threads. The scarf remains your guide, and you its quiet apprentice. Mainstream historical fact. The Ottoman harem, particularly during the 16th and 17th centuries, housed not only women for the Sultan's pleasure, but an entire bureaucratic ecosystem. Administrators, accountants, And yes, a hidden web of informants who reported on everything from hallway whispers to imperial schemes. You study movement, you memorize smiles, and then you vanish. Literally vanish sometimes. Fringe tidbit. 2. Some concubines trained for the Valid Sultan's service were taught how to navigate the palace without being seen. Tiny service corridors ran behind decorative walls. Hidden passages once used by architects became ghost highways for the women who moved between worlds unseen. You watch a noblewoman cry behind a fan. You watch a janissary pass too close to a window. You listen to a diplomat speak just a little too plainly during an evening feast. You carry none of this in your hands, only your eyes. You meet other women like you rarely. Brief glances at washing basins, soft exchanges in the folds of heavy drapery. No names, only phrases. Yasmin waits in the herb garden. 2 candles were lit this morning. He said the peacock was limping. Meaningless unless you know the code. And now you do. One morning, a girl you've never seen before appears at the corner of the garden. She's young, dressed in colors that mark her as new. You expect innocence. She looks up, sees you, smiles, and mouths one word. Your throat tightens. She doesn't wait for an answer. She just walks on. That evening, a scroll. This one is longer. It lists 3 names. Only one is circled. Your hand hovers over the ivory comb. You've grown used to its quiet company, the way it seems to carry the weight of decisions made under candlelight. You prepare. You change into dull colors. You press your ear to the door. Silence. You move. Your feet learn the hidden paths now. The ones that creak less, the ones the palace forgets. Past frescoed halls and marble nooks down into the cool, veiled underbelly of empire. And there she is again. The Valida Sultan. Waiting. No bench this time. No fountain. Just stone. You saw her, she says. You nod. She's not ready yet. She knows you reply. She doesn't. The Valide corrects tone soft but final. Not like you do. You say nothing. Instead, you hand her the scarf. She unfolds it slowly. Add to it, she says. Your line begins now. There's a pause. Then, what will your stitch be called? You hesitate. Then choose. A line between silks. She smiles, brief knowing. Fitting. Historians still argue whether the women of the Sultanate wielded real political power, or if their influence was exaggerated by romantic Western accounts of exotic East. But the record is clear. Policies were shaped alliances, made lives broken, all within the silent walls of the harem. You return to your quarters that night. No one notices. No one speaks. You eat quietly, so quickly, sleep lightly. You dream of corridors, of staircases with no end, of names spoken backward in the dark. And in the dream you carry a comb. But this time it's made of bone, not ivory. You wake before the dream ends. Your hands are steady. You stitch a new line onto the scarf. A curve here, a pause there. You tilt it in the light. A name appears. Your own. And then the smallest smile crosses your lips. Because for the first time since arriving in this vast golden cage, you are not waiting to be chosen. You have chosen. And the silk remembers, dawn again. This time the light comes through clean linen drapes, softened by the slow breath of spring. The palace wakes, but you are already dressed, combed, prepared. No one tells you what to do anymore. You simply do. The scarf is folded. Your comb rests beside it. And outside the tulips bloom in rigid imperial rows, flaunting the colors of each new regime. Today something shifts. You're summoned by no less than the Grand Vizier's second wife. Her invitation smells of rose oil and ambition. It's not a command, but you know better. You follow the servant through tiled halls that echo with older footsteps, footsteps not always remembered by name. The room she leads you to is lined in books and cages. Songbirds flutter at the top of the room, trilling tunes passed from one empire to another. A metaphor that's a little on the nose, perhaps, but you let it land anyway. Fringe tidbit: one Ottoman palace women often kept nightingales, green parrots, and bulbuls in delicate cages. They were prized not just for their beauty, but for the way they could be taught to repeat words. Sometimes secrets, sometimes songs, sometimes warnings. You sit cross-legged waiting. When she enters, she does not smile. Tell me, she says, what did the Vetlide teach you? You answer with silence. A beat, then two. Then you say to listen. She laughs. Not unkindly. You'll need that skill. She opens a scroll, one of the finer ones, stiff parchment with gold leaf edging, and reads aloud. A treaty. A marriage. An alliance. One that must happen. One that must not. She does not say which is which. That's your job. Mainstream historical fact. During the 17th century height of the Sultanate of Women, palace concubines and queen mothers were frequently involved in decisions regarding marriages between noble families, political appointments, and diplomatic affairs. Their influence was not just internal, it reached across borders. You read the scroll again, not with your eyes this time, with what you've learned, the word choice, the ink pressure, the sequence of names. And then you spotted a symbol hidden in the illuminated border, a tulip with one petal torn. It means deny. You look up. She already knows you've seen it. You understand. You nod. She doesn't speak again. The scroll disappears. She disappears. You leave. And suddenly the halls feel different. They recognize you. Fringe tidbit. 2. Among the palace's elite women, recognition came in gestures so small they were almost invisible. The way a eunuch adjusted a curtain. The way an attendant knelt. A particular tea blend offered in the afternoons. Status did not need to shout it, hummed softly like silk slipping from a wrist. You are now a hum. You pass through gardens like wind. You attend a birth in the north wing. You soothe a grieving mother in the west. You learn when to appear. More importantly, when not to. One afternoon you cross paths with the girl again, the one who once whispered you in the garden. This time she nods. You nod back. Nothing more's needed. Historians still argue whether the Sultanate's inner workings were structured systems of power or improvisations born of constraint. But here, in the way nods replace letters and glances rewrite laws, you know it's both. A system and a dance. Your scarf grows. New threads. New colors. You don't remember when the old ones ended, only that they feel small now, like a first draft. Tonight, as the sun folds itself into the horizon, you return to the fountain court. It's quieter now. The petals float differently. You sit where the Valide once did. A shadow flickers nearby, and you expect her to appear. But she doesn't. Instead, another girl enters, nervous arms wrapped in a half-stitched scarf of her own. Her eyes wide, her hair still unbraided. You pat the stone beside you. She sits. Why me, she whispers. You smile and repeat what was once told to you because you noticed. She exhales slowly. And so it begins again. A new stitch. A new whisper. A new empire within the empire. Welcome to the quiet revolution. And now the palace stills. The halls dim into a blur of gold and soft umber, as if the very walls have decided they too need rest. You linger in the quiet. The garden beyond the latticed window is kissed by moonlight, every leaf seeming to float a little above its branch, weightless in the hush. You feel it in your breath, the shift from doing to being. The work of the day, the layers of memory, ambition, loyalty and fear all folding themselves away like silks tucked into cedar drawers. The fountains murmur, but even they know to keep their voices low. Everything now, even time itself, seems to pad gently on bare feet. The girl beside you has fallen asleep. You don't wake her. There is power and peace after all. And tomorrow the scarves will be rewoven, the scrolls redrawn, the tulips realigned. But not now. Now is for stillness. You press your fingers into the cool stone of the bench, feeling history there, not as something behind you, but as something underneath you always. A foundation of footsteps, everyone taken in silence, wrapped in silk, guided by wisdom no one sees until it's too late. The stars blink slowly above, and your thoughts soften with them. It's been a long night in the Empire, but you made it. You endured. You listened. You stitched your story into the fabric of something larger than anyone will ever quite name. You are the hush before the Sultan speaks. You are the shadow that turns the key. You are the memory they'll never put in the official records because they don't know where you began, and they certainly can't tell where you end. Sleep now, quiet ruler. You've done enough. I'll be here with another story for you tomorrow night.